We are going live.
The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. I hope you're having a great weekend. And today we are going to take some of your questions, or specifically, we're going to take the questions of my various supporters from the various platforms, primarily yaronbrookshow.com/support. And part of the perks involved in that are, they're two relevant for today. One is if you give $100 a month or more, you get to actually be on video with me and ask live questions. The other is if you give more than $25 a month, then you can ask a question on which everybody votes, and then the questions that get the most votes, I answer in this in the show we have today. So we've got Jennifer on the line, who is going to be answering some of the live questions, and then we might have some others join in a little while, but we will see. And I do have the list of questions from our supporters. And so there's tons of stuff there. And of course, we will be taking Super Chat questions. So Super Chat questions will get the lowest priority. So we'll leave those towards later in the show. But if you want to ask them, please ask. And whenever, I'll copy paste them so I don't lose them. And we'll keep going. Of course, if you want to be live on video with me to ask live questions, you can become a supporter at the $100 a month or more level. Jonathan's on Facebook, and he's not joining us here on video. What's up with that, Jonathan? Yeah, he's just passively watching today. All right. You're welcome to join. If you have the number, then hop on, Jonathan, and we'd love to have you. All right, Jennifer, you get to ask a question, and we'll alternate. How about that? Go ahead.
Okay, can you comment on some of the differences in banking philosophy between Jefferson and Hamilton?
Banking philosophy?
Yes.
All right, so some of the differences between the philosophy towards banks between Jefferson and Hamilton. Is it? I wonder if it's... So first, let me say, I'm no expert on either Jefferson or Hamilton, and there are people out there who've real experts on this and who've read all the stuff and so on. So that as a caveat, let me say that I think my sense is that both Jefferson and Hamilton were wrong on banking. They both got it wrong. Jefferson was very suspicious of financial interests. He was very suspicious of banks. He was very worried about financial concentration of power, of economic power. He didn't like the idea of any kind of big bank. And really, Jefferson is the one who ultimately dominated the discussion on banking and had a really massive influence on the history of banking in the United States. Because what happened was, because of Jefferson's suspicion of large banks, and because of the fact that he was generally suspicious of industry and of capitalism as core economics, of industrialization and so on. Again, this is pre-industrial revolution, so he didn't see what was coming clearly. He was much more interested in farming, in agrarian interest. He had this romantic view of the farmer, politician, soldier kind of thing that maybe he got from the Romans or whatever. But it's very much the earth farming, working with your hands was very valued. So as a consequence, what happened was banks in the United States never got chartered federally and never really were allowed to have a federal footprint that has never had the ability to actually have branches across the entire United States. What happened was that banks were chartered and regulated and controlled at the state level. And the states, having been significantly influenced by Jefferson, protected their banks and did not allow out-of-state banks to come into their states to buy existing banks. They would not allow out-of-state banks to branch into their state. So what you got in the United States, unique to all of the countries in the world, is you got a banking system where every state had many, many banks. Some states did not allow banks to have more than one branch. Some states didn't allow the banks to go out of their county. But no states allowed banks to go outside or out-of-state banks to come into the states. It became a very, very controlled, regulated, and small industry, with the exception of New York, which was the money center banks they were called. But they even couldn't own banks outside of New York. So they had contractual relationships where they provided help to those banks, provided loans to those banks, but they never, or held deposits for those banks. But every bank was in a state, and that was it. So that at its peak, the United States had over 20,000 banks. Now, just to give you a comparison, Canada generally has had five banks. The United States has had over 20,000. Today, now in 1994, and I'll get to Hamilton in a minute. In 1994, Congress changed that and basically said banks could be federal, in the sense that they got away from federalism, but in a good way, I think, in this case. I wish they'd do this with health insurance. They got away from federalism. They basically said banks can go anywhere in the United States. They can branch anywhere. They can buy anyone. You cannot erect barriers between states for banking activity. I mean, I think ultimately that was the right case, and it should have been under the what do you call it, the interstate commerce, the Commerce Clause, but it was never perceived that way, and the Supreme Court ruled several times that banking did not count under the Commerce Clause. So 1994, Congress allowed this, and you got massive consolidation post-94. And as a consequence of that, today there are only 5,600 banks in the United States, down from 20,000. And we're probably heading towards 500 banks or 1,000 banks, but not much more than that. Again, Canada has 5 banks, and just to give you one other data point, the United States, since its founding, has had 12 banking crises, 12. Financial crises centered around banks. Canada, during the same period of time, plus or minus, has had exactly 0, not a single banking crisis. And I would argue, and many other economists would argue, that many of the banking crises in American history are a consequence of the lack of diversification at the bank level, and a consequence of this massively fragmented banking system, all brought about by too much respect, I think, for Jefferson's position. Hamilton, on the other hand, had a much healthier respect for industrialization, a healthier respect for capitalism, and he understood the importance and the crucial function of banks. And I think if Hamilton would have won, you would have never got these kind of fragmented banking system. He was for federal charters of banks. So he had a much healthier, much more rational, much more educated position about finance and about banking than Thomas Jefferson did. However, he also believed that the United States should have, in a sense, a central bank, or the equivalent of a central bank, so that the United States government would have whether it was private or whether it was run by the government, a favored bank, a bank that it dealt with exclusively. And indeed, the first American bank, and Bank of America, no, it wasn't Bank of America, first something bank, National Bank, was created when Hamilton was Treasury Secretary. And, and it was later done away with in 1936 by President, oh my God, I'm forgetting. who was president? Who was the first populist president?
In 36, you said?
Yeah, 1836.
Oh, 1836.
Yeah, 1836. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. So, you know, they are, they were both flawed, and I think Hamilton, by advocating for a central bank, I think undercut his position and ultimately let Jefferson win. I think the proper solution would have been to have federally chartered banks, independent banks, private banks, no relationship with the state. The state would bank with a variety of different banks. And, you know, you put the treasury deposits and things like that. It would have to be a variety. It could not play favoritism. There would be no national bank, i.e. central bank or anything close to a central bank. Certainly there would be no Federal Reserve. And so I think that Hamilton was right on the debate, but still fought. Andrew Jackson was the president, 1836, I think it was, where he did away with the first national bank of the United States. And then there was a second national bank of the United States, and then we got the Federal Reserve. And there were periods in which there were no national banks in the United States. And it's called the free banking era. But the free banking era was flawed because you got, I mean, it was flawed for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons was you got this proliferation of small little banks that could not consolidate and could not have a national footprint. So banking in the United States, financial institutions of the United States have been messed up, screwed up, badly regulated. Not that there's a right way to regulate, but have been regulated by the state since the founding. And really a lot of the economic problems that inflicted the United States during the 19th century and certainly during the early 20th century and into all the way up to the Great Recession of 2008 were consequences of these kind of banking issues, the bad banking regulations, over-regulations, and the over-fragmentation of the industry. All right?
Thank you.
It's the best I can do in Hamilton and Jefferson. All right, so I got a question. It's actually not so much a question, but a request for me to comment on. I don't know if you saw this story, but this is a truly, truly horrible story and something that, anyway. So, you know, there's been a lot of discussion of admissions to colleges and the standards by which colleges use to admit students. And of course, we just saw the whole corruption scandal where parents were paying off coaches and paying off professors, paying off admissions officers, pretending their students were athletes or pretending their kids were athletes or pretending their kids were you know, faking their test results or all kinds of stuff, or just writing a big fat check to an admission officer that then let them in. So that's kind of an obvious way in which the system has been gamed, and the system and just partially shows how corrupt and really, really bad the system really is. But on top of that, you've got a problem that since affirmative action, American colleges have tried to figure out how to, you know, make themselves more diverse, and particularly given the history of exclusion of universities, top universities not taking blacks, top universities not taking Jewish students. You know, the universities wanted to fix that and to amend that, and they started introducing a variety of different parameters in addition to performance, right? In addition to kind of test performance, or in addition to kind of the classical ability-based metrics, in order to achieve a certain level of diversity. And of course, my view is, if you're a private university, you can use whatever the hell criteria you want in order to accept, and you should be able to be allowed to discriminate in any way you want, and so on. Just don't lie about it. Just tell us exactly what the criteria are, and so be be it. We can play the game. Right, and everybody knows who you accept and who you don't, and that'll be it. But of course, we have anti-discrimination laws in the United States. So if a university is shown to be discriminatory and not allowed, for example, blacks in, or not allowed Jews in, then they could get into big trouble. So they have to have those groups represented in some way, or to show and prove that they didn't discriminate against them. So universities started to have, in a sense, quotas. Then the Supreme Court ruled that the universities can't have quotas, that that's discrimination as well, that they shouldn't have quotas. So universities try to come up with other measures that would proxy for race or proxy for the kind of diversity they wanted to create and use those measures. And I got a quote here from this one guy at Georgetown. He says, the purpose of these kind of other variables is, the purpose is to get to race without using race. And we'll get what variables they're using in order to do this, right? Of course, there's a lot of racism in just implying that, or at least a lot of stereotyping in order to even do that. So you've got universities in kind of a quandary. Harvard is being sued right now because they have discriminated, or the claim is that they have discriminated against Asians. That is, Asians outperform other groups on test results, but they are underrepresented in Harvard considering their overperformance on test results. So there's a whole group now, including the Trump administration, that is suing Harvard over discrimination against Asians. Now, all of this is a consequence of the fact that we have anti-discrimination laws. It's all a consequence of that provision in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that makes discrimination illegal. And of course, discrimination based on race, sex, sexual orientation, I don't know what else they've added, a disability, I think, and a bunch of other criteria. So it forces universities to have these convoluted, perverse, crazy standards by which to accept students into their student body. Of course, add to that the ideology of multiculturalism and the ideology of egalitarianism and the ideology driving much of the liberal arts universities in the United States, where people advocate for not using ability as the standard to get into college, because that just perpetuates privilege, what they call privilege, where it just perpetuates kind of the advantages you have from because of where you were born and so on. And you get a complete and utter mess. So admissions into many universities in the United States are complete disaster. By the way, for example, one way in which Texas has dealt with this is Texas basically has made it so that the University of Texas, right, the flagship of the Texas state schools, has to accept the top 10% of every high school class in Texas. So that way they get diversity, because you get the top 10% of inner city schools, the top 10% of rich public schools. You get the diversity implied. But of course, you also get you don't get a standard of quality, right? Because there's no standardized test. I'm not saying standardized tests are the best way to do this. And again, I don't have an answer to how universities should have admissions. I just think we should leave it up to every university to figure it out. And again, if they want to discriminate, they should be allowed to discriminate. So Texas does not go by ability. So a lot of kids who might be at the 11th percentiles in some really, really, really hard schools, where being in the 11th percentiles is amazing, are not going to get into the University of Texas, where somebody who is in the 9th percentile of a pretty poor school will get in, even though the one in the 11th percentile is better academically than the one in the 9th percentile. So again, all over the country, and again, this was a consequence of the Supreme Court ruling. I think it was the University of Texas case. There was also a University of Michigan case where they couldn't use race as the standard. So universities are in this quandary because they use criteria and then they get sued based on criteria, and each one of them uses different criteria and they don't know which one to use and they don't know how to use it. And it's just confusing to them. So in order to solve this quandary universities are having, the College Board is the entity, the nonprofit, that puts together and administers the SAT tests. So they're the ones that actually provide the universities with what is perceived, at least by some, and again, I have no opinion about this, as good standardized tests to be able to measure student ability. So the College Board now is going to add something to just the SAT score that they're going to send to universities. In addition to an SAT score, they are going to send another score, and that score is going to be based, is going to try to capture the student's social and economic background. So it's called, what are they calling this? They're calling this a hardship score, a hardship score, right? It's basically going to measure your, quote, privilege. I've said I hate that word. I hate the way it's used. I think it's offensive. It's disgusting, but that's what they're using, right? So I think the formal name for this by the College Board is an adversity index. It's an adversity index. So how much adversity have you faced in your life? So for example, they are going to look at your address, and from that, they're going to figure out, here are the criteria from what they have released, right? They're going to look at the neighborhood crime rate. They're going to look at vacancies, at poverty rates, at housing values, at family median income, parental education level, and marital status. Are you divorced? Like divorced, you get an extra score for adversity. I guess if your parents are married and they hate each other's guts and they yell at each other all day long, and you have a lousy, horrible, upbringing because they didn't get divorced, that is not a hardship because they can't measure it. All right. Anyway, marital status, whether your parents spoke English as a first language, the rates at which graduates from your high school matriculated into four-year colleges, and the number of advanced placement classes your school offered, not how many you took, that the school offered, and the opportunity to take advantage of free lunch, not the Milton Friedman free lunch, the welfare state free lunch, right? They're going to take all this and they can give you a score. And the higher the score, the more adversity you faced in life. And therefore, what they're telling the universities are, you can now choose how to use these two scores. One is the SAT score, how good you are, let's say, how good you are in academics. And the other is how adverse your life was, how unprivileged you are, how little privilege you might have had. And then the schools can then balance the two out and choose. Different schools will probably weight the two indexes or the two scores differently. Now, this is nuts. This is nuts. It's immoral. It's this is altruism in action, guys. Altruism in action. Altruism tells us that the more a person needs, the more deserving they become. Or another way to phrase this is the more adversity somebody has faced, the more they deserve, the more stuff they deserve to be redistributed from others. So if somebody faced adversity, then no matter their ability, no matter even how hard they actually worked, they should be allowed in. Now, look, universities have always taken some of this into account, right? You write an essay, and a lot of the essays have to do with hardships you might have encountered in life. And they judged you based on the quality of the essay, but also based on the content of it. They ask you a lot of questions in the applications. And they could always find people who've, I admire people greatly admire people who've grown up in really, really bad circumstances and still achieved something. And I think that shows a work ethic. It shows, most importantly, it shows the choices the individual has made. You can see, because they overcome adversity, you can see that they've engaged their free will, they've engaged their reason, they've engaged and made right choices. Right? They've engaged their thinking tool in order to advance in life. And that's fantastic. And to the extent that you can capture that, you want people like that at your university. But I don't get a sense that that's what's being captured here. Although maybe by combining the adversity goal with all the other scores that a university has, a adversity index, but just having an index like this that has weightings on all these different things is just stupid. There's so many other ways. Again, a university could be able to find those ambitious, what Ayn Rand called the ambitious poor, the people who are ambitious, who grew up under bad circumstances but are ambitious. And you want to reward ambition, particularly if it's led to good performance. But this is the opposite. This is the attempt to reward need. And this is the attempt, more importantly, to punish what they call privilege. Because you might have been born to a middle-class family, or to a, God forbid, to a wealthy family. Because your parents might have been educated. Because your parents might be actually born in America. Because they might have divorced or whatever, or not divorced, stayed married. You get penalized. Why? You might be just as ambitious as the other kids. You could have worked as hard. And of course, you might be just as intelligent or more intelligent. And now we're going to penalize you. And of course, at the end of the day, morality, the morality of altruism always is geared towards penalizing the good. And I'm not here talking about and the good and the able at the expense of the needy. And this is about knocking down. It's about one more, by the way, the students won't get their adversity score. Only the universities will. But imagine if those start leaking and we'll all have adversity scores and we'll all be able to tell each other what our adversity score is. And, oh, you've got a high adversity score, so I have to admire you because you're a needy person, and I have a low adversity score, so I have to apologize constantly because I'm so-called privileged. I mean, this is the consequence of altruism and a nihilistic desire to hurt those who are able, and an irrational desire to help those in need because they're in need by sacrificing those who have. And to a large extent, this is influenced by John Rawls's idea, that egalitarian idea, that the standard for success of any society is how the least able, the most needy in society are doing. And that everything in the end should be sacrificed for them because they are the standard. So, I mean, this is truly horrific. And the fact that the universities don't have the guts to do this themselves, the fact that now they've had to outsource them to the college board, tells you a little bit about what's going on in universities and the pressure they're in, and kind of how once you open this can of worms, there's no end to it. It's just one mess after another mess after another mess. And there's no objective standard. And again, different universities should set different goals and should have their own standard based on those goals. All right. And somebody, I read an article about this, and they said, of course, this can be gamed too. Parents can get divorced in order to get their kids into a better school. Parents can move into a lousy neighborhood in order to get their kids into a better, and believe me, there will be parents who do this, to get their kids into a better university. So parents are going to game this, just like they gamed any other standards when they come out. Parents are going to try to game this, and game this in a way that provides very perversive, weird, just stupid incentives for people, in terms that maybe they should beat their kids up once in a while, so the kid can say, "I come from a abusive family." Maybe because that'll help them in the adversity index, help them get into a better university. It really is troubling to see the extent to which altruism plays into these kind of rules of the game, the way society functions and the way society is structuring itself. And it's impacting more and more and more of our institutions as we move forward. I mean, you get this in the workplace, you get it at universities, and I mean, it hasn't impacted the workplace quite as much, but you still get all these sensitivity training and all this nonsense at the workplace. And again, all of this starts with a legitimate grievance: racism, sexism, people behaving badly towards other people in the workplace. So none of this stuff is completely random. And what gives it the semblance of legitimacy is that it is presented as solving a problem. But this is the wrong way to solve a problem. The way to solve a problem is to go back to what America was built on, to go back to Martin Luther King's famous statement, to become colorblind, sex blind, at least. You don't always want to be sex blind. There are important ways in which you want to know the other purpose of sex. But in terms of moral character, to evaluate people based on their ability. And every university should set up its own criteria of what that ability looks like. Oh, some universities could say, we're not about ability. We're about something else. Okay, just let us know what it is. And it would be good if we're going to have a good, healthy, productive university system, higher educational system, that these criteria be rational criteria, not irrational. All right, that was a long answer. Back to Jennifer. Your question.
Do you have an opinion on Boris Johnson? I think he's trying to be prime minister now.
Yeah, Boris Johnson. I mean, he's like, he's such a mixed case. He's a attention-seeking, unprincipled, kind of strange case. He's a half environmentalist, half conservative, a little bit free markets, a little bit this, a little bit that, mishmash. I go to London a lot, and he was mayor of London for many years. And his brilliant idea, his contribution to the city of London was stupid bicycle lanes all over London. So London traffic has always been horrible. I mean, really horrible. And now with the bicycle lanes, it's just insane because they've taken the narrow streets of London, like right on the Thames River, and they've added a bicycle lane where people can drive. And just for that, he should go to hell. And so he's done stuff like that, right? And again, also think about London and bicycles, right? I know, like in Copenhagen, everybody rides bicycles, and in Amsterdam, everybody rides bicycles. But think about this objectively. It doesn't make any sense for these people to ride bicycles. I'm being a little flippant here, right? It's cold in these countries. It's wet in these countries. How can you ride a bicycle when it's snowing or raining or just ugly and cold and miserable and gray? I mean, bicycle riding is for California. I'm sorry. It's for beautiful sunshine. I don't get it. So to be serious again, Johnson is a mixed bag. Anybody's better than May. He certainly strikes me as better on the economics and on what do you call it? Probably on Brexit, he'll be better. And nobody knows if when he went for Brexit, was he doing that as a publicity stunt? Because he's used to doing publicity stunts. He's not great, but he's better than me, is the best I can do. All right, I'm going to turn on some lights here. Sorry, I forgot to turn on the lights before I started the show. I look much better this way, I hope. All right, so let's take a quick question from here. Should the ability to vote be restricted? For example, those who receive government subsidies or welfare cannot vote, or a test, basic knowledge of government must be passed to be allowed to vote. Well, I mean, this is a tricky question. And let me just say, this is me talking. I don't think Ayn Rand really talked about this. So I don't want to say anything that you might think Ayn Rand said, because she didn't. So today, I think this is a irrelevant question, right? Nobody is going to restrict voting today. I mean, democracy today is God. God. You can't question anything. You can question pretty much anything, but you cannot question democracy. So the idea that some people wouldn't be allowed to vote, I mean, some people want non-citizens to vote. So the idea that you wouldn't allow some people to vote is it just wouldn't happen. So the idea that if you receive government subsidies or welfare, you couldn't vote would never is not doable today. The only time you could exclude some people from voting is in a truly free society, so in an objectivist society. And yes, I suspect, and I'm going to say stuff here that will never in my lifetime be tested, because we're not going to have a free society in my lifetime, but hopefully future generation will test this out and think it through and evaluate it. But this is the kind of stuff where a lot of thinking has to be done before we become truly free. And that thinking hasn't been done yet. So this is my initial thoughts on this. Yes, I think you would restrict voting. For example, I do think a basic test of knowledge of government, of the functioning of government, of the role of government, of the nature and the content of the Constitution. Not asking you if you agree, not asking you what your philosophy is, not asking what your ideas are, but just asking questions that reveal your understanding of the document and the principles behind it. That, I think, would be a test. And I've said before, I think there should be a test for citizenship. I also suspect that there should be a test for voting. Right? Second, you've often heard me, and Ayn Rand talked about this, about voluntary revenue generation. I'm going to call it voluntary taxation. Even many people object to that because taxation, they think, is by necessity coercive. And maybe it is, and it's not. That's not an argument I even care to get into. So voluntary revenue generation, people writing checks to government for their police, military, and judiciary for the appropriate functions of government. I think it's reasonable to say that if you don't pay that, if you don't pay a tax, let's say a minimum tax of 2%, 4%, whatever. Well, it shouldn't be that. It should be a dollar amount. Then you don't vote. So you can't determine who's going to be president if when the president asks you to support the police that you benefit from in the military, you don't do it. You don't send in your voluntary contribution. So I think that would be another thing. I mean, those would be my criteria. Payment of taxes and passing a test. Those would be the two things. So for what it's worth, because I think these are the kind of issues that will be discussed seriously in 40, 50 years when we're moving dramatically in that direction and people are starting to worry practically about how to structure such a government in such a state, what kind of laws would be objective to pass. These are the kind of issues that will have to be addressed then. All right, Jennifer.
Do you think it could be better sometimes to be wrong than to be right for the wrong reason?
Absolutely. It's better to be right. It's better to be wrong and rational than right and irrational. You're not really right if you come to the conclusion irrational. You're just lucky. And that doesn't count as truth. So it's better to be wrong and rational. That is, have used the right methodology, but have made a mistake or not had enough information or whatever, than to be right and irrational. And sometimes when you're right and irrational, it tends to reinforce the irrationality because, see, I was right. And then you start using that as your methodology because it worked out once. And that's incredibly destructive to your own epistemology, incredibly destructive to your own thinking, and incredibly destructive to your own life. So yeah, it's better to be wrong and rational. All right. Okay, here's another one. Now, what works of literature, including light fiction, do you like and why? So I made a list. It's all over the place. I mean, of course, they're the classics. Like, I mean, my favorite author is Victor Hugo. I mean, other than Ayn Rand, is Victor Hugo. I love 93 in particular, but Les Miserables, Notre Dame, Man Who Laughs, all just, I mean, experiences. And you can read them over and over again. And I think get that experience over and over again. Just like rereading Atlas Shrugged, rereading Hugo is truly a wonderful experience. Dostoevsky, although it's hard to read, and I wouldn't recommend reading it more than once, but it's also you live in that world, and it's amazing. But let me, before I give you the list, let me say this. Because I got in trouble once when I didn't say it strongly enough. I am no expert in literature. You're getting a list now that says nothing about the quality of the literature. It just says about stuff that I've enjoyed reading. I'm not an expert in literature. My views on literature are not representative of objectivism in any kind of way, and are not representative of what objectivists should be reading. All right, disclaimer out of the way. So yes, anything Ayn Rand mentions, I would go back to the Romantic Manifesto and pull out the stuff she mentions. One of the authors she mentions, who I love, is Neville Shute. Neville Shute, H-U-T-E. S-H-U-T-E, and fantastic books. Anything by him is just so much fun and so good. A lot of 19th century authors, Jules Verne, Robert Louis Stevenson, Walter Scott. I particularly love Ivanhoe. I love that story. I love the movies. I love the books, and yeah, it's a great story. Alexandre Dumas, Maupassant, Kipling, Jack London, Baroness O-R-C-Y-Z-Y, Raphael Sabatini. I went through a period where I read a bunch of Sabatini books. One of his most famous is Scaramouche, but Sabatini is fun. I went through a period where I read a bunch of Alistair MacLean. I love Alistair MacLean. I don't know if the younger generation knows Alistair MacLean, but Guns of Navarone, Ice Station Zebra, good adventure stories, good action novels. I've enjoyed Harry Potter. I've enjoyed Robert Heinlein, books of Robert Heinlein. I enjoyed the trilogy, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the recent trilogy. And then I've enjoyed a bunch of random, I like some of the, because I read Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I got into kind of Scandinavian noir, like these dark novels set in Scandinavia, thrillers. I can't remember names of authors, but I've enjoyed them. I just enjoy a wide range of books. I don't read anywhere near as much fiction as I would like to, or as I think is healthy, or as I should. So I could probably, if I had more time, I could probably come up with an even better list, but that's a good list to start out with. And again, a lot of it is focused on kind of 19th century adventure stories, less in contemporary novels to a large extent because I haven't read that many contemporary novels. I find a lot of the contemporary stuff kind of stale, and I don't know, it just doesn't have it. Somebody said the TV show Justified is based on Elmer Leonard. Yeah, I haven't read Elmer Leonard, although I love Justified as a TV show, one of my favorite TV shows. It was a lot of fun. It was a true classic Western set in modern times, so highly recommend that. All right. What else are we? Oh, yes, Jennifer.
What about poets?
Oh, geez, why are we going to other topics I don't know anything about? I mean, I love classic poetry. I mean, I love Kipling. I love Kipling. But I don't know the poets. I mean, I don't remember their names. I love the kind of 19th century romantics, and I don't remember their names. I mean, if you started a poem, I'd probably know the poem rather than knowing the poet. The poet. I liked, although some people don't consider him a serious poet, but I liked Burton Braley, an American poet who has some beautiful stuff about the mind. One of his poems is the mind behind the machine, I think it's called. Some wonderful simple poetry that really resonates. So Breton Braley has some fantastic poetry. Yeah, you know, I'm sorry, but poetry is not my strong suit. I love listening to it. So somebody starts doing a poetry reading, I love it when it's good. But I don't engage in it, and I don't have, unfortunately, at the tip of my fingertips, my favorites. Leonard did a really nice lecture, on poetry at before Ocon. It was the Lyceum Conference in 1999 in Grand Labakan, and I think you can find that on the e-store. Maybe it's already on the Ayn Rand University app or Ayn Rand campus, but it's definitely in the e-store, in the Ayn Rand Institute e-store. You can find Leonard Peikoff on poetry, which is really beautiful. And of course, Lisa Van Dam has some stuff on poetry that is very, very good. Yeah, the poem by Breton Braley that I particularly like, but he has quite a few that I like, is called The Thinker. The Thinker. Mother Goose? Come on, grow up, people. Grow up.
Do you know?
Yeah, I'm curious if you guys, or you, Jennifer, have suggestions on poetry.
Do you know the one from Edgar Allan Poe, The Bells?
What's that?
You know The Bells? From
The
Poe?
Bells by?
Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, I love Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, he's spooky, but I love Edgar Allan Poe. I like The Bells, I like The Raven, but my favorite is, oh my God, it's Annabel Lee, the one where, do you remember the name of that one?
Annabel Lee, that's what it's called.
That's called Annabel Lee. That's my favorite. One of my favorite poems of all time. I used to know big sections of it by heart, but I don't anymore. But Annabel Lee. I mean, I like late 19th century poetry, the romantic period in poetry, big stories, rhymes, but sophisticated messages. So anyway. Good. Let's see. Another question from here. You did poetry. Okay. International IP theft and trade imbalance. What is a rational policy? I mean, it feels like I've commented on this to death. So I apologize if this is going to be brief, but I've answered this question 1,000 times already. Okay. Trade imbalances don't matter. Who cares? It has no economic consequence. I've given the example of me having a trade imbalance with my grocery store. And the moral point about trade imbalances, the government has no business telling me who to buy from and who not to buy from. If I want to buy from the Chinese, the Mexicans, the only people the state should limit my ability to buy and sell to are enemies. As long as we have not defined China as an enemy, for example, it's none of your business if I buy Chinese, Vietnamese, African, or Arkansas. It doesn't matter. The government has no say. So trade imbalances are meaningless economically and meaningless morally. The only moral and economic tariff strategy, the only moral and economic, so the only practical and moral tariff strategy is a strategy of unilateral zero tariffs. And, the moral point I've made many, many times, the government should not interfere in my decisions of what to buy and what to sell, period. And putting a tax on some goods and on others is the government interfering. Economics, if another government wants to subsidize products and sell to you, you benefit from that because you get it cheaply. If another government wants to penalize its own citizens by taxing goods, it is economic stupidity and ignorance to retaliate by taxing your own people. And from a purely economic perspective, the tax is paid by consumers in the country that has the tariffs. The only way it gets redistributed a little bit to the original country is through changes in currency values. But right now, for example, the Chinese are doing everything in their power not to allow the yuan, the local currency, to devalue. And therefore, those prices are not, China is not paying for any of the tariff right now. If it was devalued, they would in some sense. But at the end of the day, it's American consumers who pay for it. Oh, international IP theft. What do we do with theft? If somebody's running an international car stealing ring, what do? We try to prosecute them to the best of our ability. We take the individuals involved and we freeze their bank accounts and we treat them as criminals. Now, what if a government is doing it? Then you treat that government as a criminal enterprise and you have serious restrictions on them. But suddenly companies who are stealing IP, you ban their products. You don't allow your products in. You don't trade for stolen goods. Stolen goods are banned. And the thieves are prosecuted to the extent that you can, given that they might be that they are in a different country. So you do what you can to prosecute thieves. And if you had a policy that said, look, if you, the Chinese government, are going to steal from us, and we'd have to define what stealing is. If you're going to hack into our computers and take our stuff, if you're going to steal from our companies when they enter China, then we will have nothing to do with you. We will boycott you. We will view you as a pariah in the world out there. We'll pull our embassy. We will, we will restrict you in every way that we can. And in the stolen goods, you will not be allowed to trade. That should be the policy. But neither one of those are going to happen. So I would be tougher on the Chinese than what Trump is over IP. And I wouldn't care one iota about so-called imbalance. And I wouldn't use tariffs no matter what. Tariffs are the dumbest strategy possible to deal with anything. All right. Jennifer.
Sometimes people will call something a necessary evil. Isn't that an oxymoron? Like sometimes people say government is that. But.
Yeah, I mean, government certainly isn't a necessary evil, but you can say between, yes, I don't think there's any necessary evil. Sometimes voting is a necessary evil when you're voting for somebody you don't want. So the least of two evils or something like that. But yes, I think it is an oxymoron because something evil, you shouldn't do it. If it's truly evil. The moral is the practical, and if it's evil, it means it's hurting your life. You should never do stuff that hurts your life. You should always find a way around it.
Thank you.
All right. Let's take a super chat question. Is objectivism compatible with gambling? I'm curious specifically about poker. Could a consistent objectivist World Series poker player exist? Yes. I mean, I don't think poker at that level is gambling. Poker in that level, I mean, not gambling in the sense that it's a game of chance, so pure chance. Poker to a large extent is a game of skill. It's a game of knowing the probabilities. It's a game of knowing somewhat about something about psychology and knowing how the other players are playing. So I don't consider poker particularly gambling if you know what you're doing, right? And certainly if you're a World Series poker player, a champion, then you know what you're doing. And I know several. I know pretty well two people who've won the World Series poker tournament. One of them is an objectivist, and I know a woman who was like the best female poker player for years, and they're incredibly rational, and they it's all statistics, and they know exactly what they're doing, and psychology, statistics and psychology, and they know how not to act on emotion. They know how to do the probabilities, and they act on them. I don't. So that's poker. With regard to just plain gambling, slot machines, I don't know. 21, there's some skill. I don't think there's any skill in baccarat. I don't think there's any skill in some of the other, roulette wheel. There's no skill in roulette wheels, right? Now, is objectivism compatible with that? It could be, in a sense, if you're having fun doing it. Now, I don't know why you would have fun doing it. I don't know what's fun about it, but I used to have fun doing it. I used to play baccarat, and I had fun. But I stopped having fun at some point because it just seemed so irrational, the whole thing. I was obviously going to lose money in the end, even if I gained money in the short run. I was only really having fun when I was winning money. When I was losing money, I was miserable. So I stopped doing it. So I don't think pure gambling, is rational. I don't. I think poker, 21 to the extent that you're playing the odds, counting cards, and other games where there's skill involved, yes, but not the pure games of chance. All right, Jennifer, another one from you. Let me know if you want me to stop with yours.
Have you ever heard people say that they don't want to live forever? And I would want
Yeah, I know a lot of people who say that.
I would, as long as I'm in good health. I don't understand why anybody would say that.
Yeah, I do too. So I'm always, death pisses me off because I won't get to read the end of the novel. I want to know what happens. I want to know how all the storylines tie up, and I won't, right? I'll only know one storyline. That's mine, tying up. So I'd like to know all the other storylines. I'm a curious guy, so I don't buy it. I don't get this idea of not wanting to live forever. Again, with the caveat of good health. That's an important caveat. All right. Have you read the Federalist, Anti-Federalist papers? If so, who do you think made the better argument? I did a long time ago, so it's been a long time ago, and I can't say I read them diligently. I think I read, I don't know, a third of them, maybe half of them. I probably didn't read every single one of them. I mean, I have to say, I was just impressed by the quality of argument. I found myself agreeing often with both sides or elements of both sides. And I think the truth, it was somewhere, I don't want to say in between, but somewhere where you would have to take elements of the Federalist and elements of the Anti-Federalist to achieve the ultimate truth. But, there were such geniuses. And the content is so intriguing and fascinating and exciting that, I don't know who made the better arguments. Generally, I tend to be an anti-federalist, but Hamilton was so brilliant, and so was Madison, and they're the ones who wrote most of this, that I find it hard to critique them, particularly where you could probably critique both sides. So anyway, I'm copping out, and partially because it's been a long time since I read them. All right, let's see. We'll take another question from here, and then we'll go back to Jennifer. All right, I'm going to do this quickly. Please provide a short overview of rationalist philosophy with emphasis on areas that contradict objectivism, since objectivism holds rationality as prime virtue. We are often confused with the rationalists. Rationalists believe in the primacy of consciousness. That is the primary essential difference between objectivism and rationalists. Rationalists believe in the primacy of consciousness. So at the beginning, everything begins and ends with consciousness, and reason, rationality, is in some ways, I mean, this is a bit of a caricature, in some ways, a game played inside your head with not really a direct reference to reality, to the facts in reality out there, because what's primary, what's more important than the facts in reality out there is your own consciousness. And in a sense, to some extent, your consciousness is what is creating the facts out there. So the rationalists were very, in a sense, logical. They tried to apply logic, but divorced from reality. And therefore, what they were doing was not true rationality, and it was not real reason. Even though they call themselves rationalists, they weren't rational, because rational means tying it to reality. It means a commitment to the facts of reality, using logic to identify and understand and integrate the facts of reality. That's the fundamental difference. And I'm sure if we had a philosopher on here, they could tell you some more differences, but that's me. All right, let's see. Let's go to Jennifer.
There's a question on the super chat about abortion. I was going to ask you that too, what the federal government should do about these new abortion laws.
Oh, I don't see it in the super chat.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Anything to say about abortion and the political environment around it? I mean, yeah, there's a lot to say, right? I am very much pro-abortion. I believe in a woman's right to make that decision. In terms of rights, I believe that she has a right to make that decision until the baby is born. So until it's a viable entity, a separated entity, an entity that is being separated from the mother. So as soon as it's living outside of the mother, it gains political rights, and therefore the state should protect it, right? I think that morally, the sooner a woman has an abortion, the better. That is, as soon as she knows she's pregnant, I think it's incumbent upon her morally to make a decision to a large extent, because the more she waits, the more complex the procedure is, the more damage she will do to herself, the more risk she places herself in. And therefore, it's irrational for her to keep on waiting and not make a decision. A decision has to be made, and she should make it quickly. Now, so I can only see a moral reason to have an abortion in the late stages, let's say in the last 3 months, is if the fetus is being discovered to have severe defects, or if for some reason the mother's life is in danger and the fetus cannot be saved. So morally, I think it's very, very, very unusual to have an abortion in the last trimester. So I think morally, the earlier the abortion is, the more likely it is to have been come to as a rational decision, and come to with the kind of haste that a decision like this should have. From the politics of the whole thing, I mean, Ayn Rand mentioned this. I mean, in the first 3 months, the fetus is basically a clump of cells, and there should be no discussion about abortion. There should be no question about abortion. I mean, it should be trivial. I can imagine and I can understand why people object to abortion in the final trimester, and I can see why that would be an issue. This issue of viability, this issue of brain function. I can see that. I don't accept it. I don't agree with it, but I can see that. And I could see even that I could live in a world in which different state had different abortion laws that defined the final date of an abortion, a legal abortion at a different place. As long as federal law, abortion was deemed to be fine in, let's say, the first 3 months of, or whenever viability was, or something, some cutoff. So you should be able to have an abortion anywhere in the first, let's say, 3, 4, 5 months of a pregnancy. And maybe I could imagine a world, I wouldn't rule this out completely politically, that different states could set then different terms, like New York just said, they only get political rights when they're actually fully born. Fine. Alabama could set, oh no, as soon as it's viable, that's, let's say, 5 months or 6 months. That is reasonable to me, as long as there are exceptions for things like the baby is deformed or a mother health is at stake. So that would be, my position. The Supreme Court should unequivocally support abortion through a significant term and then let the states have a variety of different things across different terms. Now, what Alabama has done is heart rate. I don't think heart rate is the standard. I don't understand why it would be the standard. And other states have, and a lot of times a woman doesn't even know she's pregnant until after the 3rd month. So there has to be a period of time in which a woman can choose to abort. So it has to be more than the 3-month standard. It has to be something close to viability. And even then, I would still advocate that the right standard is, birth. Now, it sounds like Alabama completely banned it, and there are a number of states now that are considering practically completely banning it. That is evil. That is wrong. That should be fought against on every level possible. The idea that when you're a clump of cells just conceived, that is human life that requires government protection, because that government protection, that you somehow have rights because you've gone from 2 cells to 4 cells, that is absurd, anti-scientific, anti-life. And therefore, those bills should be completely overturned and absolutely unequivocally rejected. All right. Let's see. And I think the left is winning here. The left has figured out they can do this at the state level and force the Supreme Court's hand. Not the left is winning. The right is winning here. The religious right is winning here. They have, over the last 8 years, had a strategy since the Bush White House where they didn't make any progress on abortion. The strategy of the religious right has shifted to a strategy focused on states, on state legislatures. And what you're seeing now is the culmination of years and years of work by the anti-abortion religious right that have basically infiltrated every state legislature. And now you're seeing state after state after state compete on who can have the harsher anti-abortion laws. And, this was a huge issue for Ayn Rand. It's a huge issue for me. I think completely banning abortion is evil, immoral, and the Supreme Court should defend unequivocally a woman's right to an abortion up to a significant portion. Ideally up to birth, but if it's not going to be up to birth until until 5-6 months, where you could argue about viability and where you have given the woman enough time to make a rational decision about whether she wants to keep the child, and also given enough time for, you need to give exemptions for deformity and health risks. All right. Again, there's probably a lot more to say about abortion. I was going to pick up the topic in one of my future shows because it's everywhere in the news. I was going to wait until some of the courts started ruling on this, because all of these are going to be in the courts soon. And it's going to be interesting how different district courts are going to rule on it. And then what happens when it goes to the Supreme Court, it's going to be fascinating. All right. As someone who once tried to end his life, I struggle with the issue of assisted suicide. Glad I'm alive, but the option would have been welcome at the time. How do I proceed forming an opinion here? Well, no doctor is going to assist somebody to commit suicide unless that person, by the doctor's own standards, granted, is in such pain, physical pain, right? Medical pain, because we're asking a doctor to facilitate this, that he can't, that this is something that's rational. Right? And I think, look, I believe that in a rational world, you have a right to commit suicide. But will somebody help you commit it? Not unless you've convinced them that there's good reason to help you. And you get it in writing. They get it in writing because they don't want to be prosecuted for murder. So it's going to have a whole complexity around the process, which is going to give you lots and lots of opportunities to back out. On the other hand, you're right. If suicide is easier, let's say because certain drugs are available on the market, or let's say it's just easier to get access to things that can kill you, then more people will commit suicide who would have regretted it if they had failed in their first suicide attempt. Tough. Don't try to commit suicide. If you try to commit suicide and succeed, your problem, not mine. I mean, that sounds cool, but that's the essence of it, right? You tried, you failed, you were lucky, or you tried in such a weak way because you didn't really want to succeed, which often happens with suicide, right? People don't really want to succeed. They want the attention. They want to think that they're doing it, all kinds of psychological reasons, but they do it in a way that won't succeed. But you have a right to commit suicide, and you know, I'll stop you once, but I won't stop you a second time. And if you can make a rational argument for me to help, and the law protects me of helping you, then I'll help you. If I care enough about it, right? So if you're in pain or if in such pain, then yeah, I would definitely help you. Somebody asked if abortion should be legal in Israel. It is legal in Israel, or at least it's performed in Israel, whether legal or not. It's performed quite well in Israel. All right, let's see. Jennifer, do you have a question?
I'm done for now. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
All right, I was recently invited to become a Freemason by someone in my family. I said I would think about it. Is Freemasonry compatible with objectivism? I mean, no, probably not. I mean, Freemasonry is, part of it is a belief in, I think that part of Freemasonry is a belief in a God, although it doesn't specify which God in particular. It's got all sorts of rituals and beliefs and systems of behavior and stuff that I don't think meet the rationality test. But I'll admit, I don't know. I don't know. So I don't know enough about Freemasonry to have a definitive answer, put it that way. But it doesn't strike me as compatible based on the little I know. All right. Question, right? Let me just do something here. Critique of comic book hero films. I've done this before as well. You know, the is not to accuse you. You put money behind the question, so I'll answer it. But I'm not a fan of comic book heroes because they tend to be superheroes. I like heroes. Heroes are human. Heroes are within the capacity of what heroes are capable of doing, exhibit heroic traits. They can do the heroic. So I don't like that they have superpowers in order to be heroic. I like a little bit. I've watched a little bit and it's enjoyable, but more and more and over again, the same story over and over again with a little bit of a twist here and a little bit of a twist there. I mean, get some originality, people. It's the same story over and over and over and over again. It's boring. So I'm bored by comic book heroes primarily. But also, you know, they have to make them altruistic. The whole point of being a superhero is you have to sacrifice your loved ones. You have to sacrifice your life. You have to sacrifice your happiness for the sake of humanity, for the sake of scumbags who pretend to be humanity. Right? So it's, I'm not a fan, and I wish the creative energy that went into making these comic book heroes went into making great movies with real life great heroes, real heroes that function in this world. I mean, I have a similar critique of fantasy, although I think fantasy at this point is better than comic book heroes because at least it's not as repetitive as the comic book heroes are. But I have the same critique of fantasy, the magic without rules. How do you know when they can use magic and when they can't? And if they have so many magical powers, why don't they just solve all the problems, get on with it? I mean, it's like the Harry Potter and the Game of Thrones and the, what do you call it? Tolkien. And, you know, it's just, I enjoy it. I like it, but they're not fully heroic. you can't enjoy it quite as much. So I don't think they're that good. At least not over and over and over again. Once or twice, maybe. Okay. We got 3 more questions and then we're done. It's getting late. Your opinion of a voting system that you can rank, where you can rank parties. If you're number 1, don't get a certain limit, then your vote goes to number 2. I hate that system. I think that's an awful system, because what if number 2 is the exact opposite of my number 1 choice? Why would they get my vote? I don't want them to get my vote if they're the exact opposite of my number 1 choice. So no, I'm very opposed to that. I don't believe any time your vote should go to a party you didn't clearly choose your vote to go to. Thoughts on the TV show Turn? Would you consider the main character a hero? Haven't seen it. I'll look into it. Turn, T-U-R-N. All right. I'll look into it and let you know. All right. If you had to start over and had to commit full-time to finance or being a public intellectual, which would you pick, and what would your, I assume, life look like? That's a tough one. Wow. If I had to pick, I'd pick being a public intellectual because I enjoy it more. I have more fun with it. I'm better at it. Easier for me to differentiate myself. There are people in finance who are much better than me at finance. How would my life look different? It's hard to tell because it depends when I would have made that choice, how I would have made that choice, at what point in my life. It's hard for me to imagine myself picking to be a public intellectual when I was very young. That option was never on my mind. I could have never imagined it. I was an engineer, and later I became a finance guy and turned to being a public intellectual only as a consequence of being a finance guy. But so I can't really separate them out completely. But if I'd chosen to just be a public intellectual, the biggest difference in my life was I'd be poorer. I would have less money. I mean, as it is, I'm not super rich because I never committed to myself to finance fully. I basically have given up many millions of dollars, potentially tens of millions of dollars, in order to pursue a public intellectual career. I'm not, I'm fairly wealthy, but I could have been probably 5 times wealthier than I am today if I just focused on finance. But, I'm quite happy. I love the combination. I mean, my life, it's hard for me to imagine with 1 or 2 exception areas where my life could be better. I can't imagine a much better life than I have. I mean, I do what I love to do. I travel around the world, seeing amazing stuff, meeting amazing people, interacting with amazing human beings all over the world, literally all over the world, in every culture from almost every country in the world. So I have a blast. I love doing this, and I don't have to be monetarily successful doing this because I'm monetarily successful elsewhere. I don't have to. Now, I shouldn't say this because then you'll stop supporting the show as much, but I don't, the show, the financial support for the show for me is primarily validation that you value the show. It's not what is required for me to live off of. So I can go around the world. I go around the world. I do the stuff that I love doing. I advocate for philosophy I truly believe in and live. I have fun doing the work. The finance stuff is stuff that I, with my partner, developed 20-something years ago, constantly refining, enjoying it, having fun with it, and making money off of it. I mean, and I live on an island in the Caribbean with almost perfect weather, not quite, in a beautiful place, having a great time. So life is good. Life is good. So I wouldn't give up the combination that I have today, particularly today. On the public intellectual side, I only do the stuff I like doing. I don't manage people. I do a little bit of fundraising, but not a lot. I ask you guys a little bit for money, but I don't overly do that. And I'm not obsessed by it because it's not crucial to my life. And, you know, life is good. I've got an amazing, amazing wife. On every aspect of my life, again, with one or two exceptions, life is fantastic. So, and the people who think self-interest is tied up in money and self-interest is only money don't know what life's about. And I'm missing the whole point. So the beauty of it is I can have my financial wishes granted, and I can live and enjoy and love doing the stuff that I do. So I have the best of both worlds right now, and it is fantastic. So, all right, thanks everybody. I know I still have some of the questions. I'll pick up on some of the questions on a future show. Super chat questions are always welcome. We raised a decent amount of money, although I don't know, NOK, that is Norwegian, 100. I don't know how much that is. So I don't really know how much we raised today. But thank you for all your support. Again, I really, really, really appreciate all of you who support the show on yaronbrookshow.com/support. I really appreciate those of you who use the super chat for supporting the show financially. As you know, I only answer questions where you've put a little bit of money behind it because it shows you value the answers. And those of you on the Subscribe Star, and some of you are still on Patreon, all of you, really appreciate you all. Thanks a lot. Now, the next show, I don't know exactly when I'm going to do it. So I leave tomorrow for Dallas, and then from Dallas, I will be Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, and Mongolia. And by the way, all those places in Asia, I love. I mean, it's going to be a blast. It's going to be a blast, and I have a full schedule, with the exception of Singapore, where I left my schedule somewhat open because I want to have some time to do touristy stuff because I've never been to Singapore. I love those places. I love Asia generally. It's going to be a phenomenal trip. I just don't know the extent to which I'll have availability, internet connection, and all the rest of the stuff to actually do the show. But I will try, and I will try to do a show from every city so I can give you kind of updates on how it's going in every city. We have events in every city, so I'll be doing my public intellectual stuff from every city. But I also be working to raise money for my hedge fund in a few of the cities as well. So again, combining the finance with the public intellectual stuff, which is what I love doing. And I'll get to eat at some phenomenal restaurants. I've already got reservations at some really top, some of the top restaurants in the world. And it's going to be a blast, but the downside of it is not sure exactly when I'll be able to do shows. All right, yaronbrookshow.com/support. If you want to know my schedule in Asia, if you're in Asia and you'd like to come to some of the events, almost all the events are open to the public. You can find that on yaronbrookshow.com under the events tab. Find the events tab and you can find it. And, I look forward to seeing some of you there. And, we're going to have a blast. I'm going to have a blast, and hopefully some of you will be joining me there to have a blast. Talk to you all certainly when I get back. I get back June 10th. Oh my God, June 10th. So I'll probably be doing a show June 11th. But hopefully we'll be doing several shows before that. I'm really looking forward to doing a show from Mongolia. That'll be cool. For my ute in Mongolia. No, I'm not really staying in a ute. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Jennifer.